The air in that conference room was always too cold, like they were trying to freeze out any real emotion, any genuine reaction. It was just me and him, my boss, David. The glass table between us felt a mile wide. He had my annual review open in front of him, but he wasn't really looking at it. He was just using it as a prop. He started talking about corporate fit team dynamics. It was all corporate speak, meaningless words designed to dress up a brutal truth. He said my ideas were often too disruptive, that I questioned processes too much, that I didn't seem to embrace the company culture. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I kept thinking, just get through this, nod, smile, agree, get your bonus, and go back to your desk. Past the building sometimes just to look at it. It wasn't just a building anymore, it was a symbol. Every time I felt tired or doubted myself, I'd hear David's voice. You don't belong here. It was the fuel. The real fun began the next day. I put on my best casual clothes and just showed up. I walked right in like I owned the place, which technically I did. Gary came barreling out of his office, his face the color of a boiled ham. You, he yelled, pointing a finger. Me, I said cheerfully, just doing my landlordly duties. First order of business. I pointed out the window to the parking lot. See that spot, the one right by the door with the reserved for president sign? That's mine now. I'll need you to move your car. Actually, you know what I think I'd like? That little Zen garden for my new office. Could you have that boxed up for me? The sputtering, the glorious apoplectic sputtering. It was better than I had ever imagined. Brenda from accounting was trying very hard not to laugh. The fiddle-leaf fig tree seemed to stand a little taller. So what's the moral of the story? Don't use Comic Sans. No, the moral is that sometimes life gives you lemons, and sometimes if you're lucky and a little bit unhinged, you can use those lemons to not just make lemonade, but to buy the entire lemonade factory, and then charge your old boss rent for squeezing the lemons. It's not about the money, it's about the joke. And let me tell you, a well-executed joke, especially one with its own parking space, is the best revenge imaginable. The air in that conference room was always too cold. It was a calculated chill, meant to keep you sharp, or maybe just uncomfortable. I remember the fake wood grain of the table. A cheap laminate trying to look expensive. I remember the way the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant low-grade headache. My boss, David, sat across from me. He had this file in front of him, my file, and he hadn't even opened it. That was the first sign. He started with the usual corporate speak, synergy, bandwidth, valued. But his eyes were flat. He wasn't looking at me. Not really, he was looking at a problem he needed to solve. He said my last project showed a lack of foresight, that my approach wasn't aligned with the company's core vision. I tried to interject to defend my work, to explain the constraints I'd been under. He held up a hand, just a single hand, palm out, like I was a traffic jam he needed to stop. And then he said it. He leaned forward and his voice dropped. But it wasn't confidential, it was condescending. He said, let's be honest, Sarah, I've looked at your trajectory, and the truth is you just don't belong here. You don't belong here. The words didn't even land with anger at first. They landed with a kind of hollow thud, like a stone dropped into a deep, empty well. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I could feel the eyes of the HR representative sitting silently next to him, complicit. I looked at the framed corporate mission statement on the wall behind his head. Teamwork, integrity, respect. The letters seemed to blur and swim. The rest of the meeting was a muffled echo, something about a transition plan, something about severance. I nodded. I think I even said thank you. It was pure autopilot, the professional death reflex. I stood up, my legs feeling like rubber, and walked out of that room. The day I made the initial offer, my hands were shaking. I was dealing through a shell company I'd set up using a lawyer who specialized in discrete transactions. We were just a nameless, faceless investment group. As far as the sellers knew, the negotiations were tense. There was another bidder. For a few weeks I thought I'd lost it. The disappointment was a physical ache. But then our final offer was accepted. The signing date was set. The walk back to my desk was the longest walk of my life. It was mid-afternoon, and the office was a hive of quiet activity, keyboards clicking, phones buzzing. And I had to walk past every single cubicle. I felt their eyes on me. The pitying looks, the curious glances, the ones who quickly looked away pretending not to see I was a ghost, already a non-person. I cleaned out my desk into a single cardboard box, a framed photo of my dog, a coffee mug. It was all so pathetic, so final. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. What was there to say? I didn't belong. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time, just sat there staring at the concrete wall. The humiliation was a hot, sharp knot in my chest. It tightened into something else, a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't going to be the end of the story. He thought he could discard me, he thought he held all the power. A plan began to form in my mind, not as a vague fantasy, but as a clear, concrete objective. I wasn't just going to get another job. I was going to prove him wrong in a way he could never ignore. The next morning I acted with a calm. I didn't feel. I drafted a perfectly polite, utterly emotionless resignation letter. I thanked David for the opportunity. I wished the company all the best. I gave nothing away. I was a blank slate. Meanwhile, I opened my laptop, and I started my real work. The first step was research. I needed to understand the beast. I wanted to conquer. I dug into the company's public financials. They were a publicly traded entity, so a lot of it was there for anyone to see: revenue streams, profit margins, debt. I read analyst reports. I learned that their last earnings call had been shaky, that their stock price was under pressure. They were profitable, but they were vulnerable. Then I dug deeper. I looked into the property records for the building itself. It was a modern 12-story glass tower in a prime business district, a signature address, and after a few days of searching through county real estate portfolios, I found that the building wasn't owned by my former company. They were tenants. They leased the entire space from a real estate investment trust, and that trust, facing its own liquidity issues, had quietly listed the property for sale. The listing was discreet, almost secretive. They didn't want to spook their major tenants, but it was there. The opportunity was real. That was the moment, sitting at my kitchen table, seeing that listing pop up on my screen. The audacity of the idea hit me all at once. It wasn't just about getting a better job. It was about changing the entire board. It was about becoming the landlord, becoming the ground beneath their feet. The financial hurdle was, of course, immense. I wasn't a billionaire, but I had assets. I had a 401k I could borrow against. I had a portfolio I could leverage. I had equity in my home. This was going to be all or nothing. I reached out to a financial advisor I trusted implicitly, and I laid out the plan. He thought I was crazy at first, but he saw the fire in my eyes. He ran the numbers. The building was a solid asset. The current lease with my former company was a guaranteed long-term income stream. It was, from a purely financial perspective, a sound investment. The revenge was just a very, very satisfying bonus. The closing was in a law office downtown, all dark wood and leather. It was quiet, anticlimactic. There were just a few of us in the room: me, my lawyer, the seller's representatives. I signed a stack of papers. They signed. There was a handshake. And just like that, I owned it: the land, the bricks, the windows, the very air. My former colleagues breathed. I walked out onto the street, the autumn air crisp, and I looked up at the building towering over me. The feeling wasn't joy exactly. It was a deep, profound stillness, a sense. We structured the offer through a newly created LLC, a ghost company, a silent predator. My name was nowhere on the paperwork. The lawyers for the trust never knew who they were really dealing with. The negotiations were tense, but straightforward. They wanted a quick, clean sale. We gave them one. The due diligence period felt like a lifetime. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. I was sure someone would find out, that the deal would collapse, but it didn't. The day of the closing was surreal. I walked into a law office downtown, all dark wood and serious quiet. I signed a mountain of papers. My hand was steady. When the last document was notarized, the lawyer handed me a single key, a symbolic gesture, but it felt like Excalibur. I was the sole owner of 1200 Enterprise Drive. I owned the land, the foundation, the glass, the steel. I owned the very air they breathed in that office. The victory was completely silent. There was no applause, just the soft click of a pen, but it was the most powerful moment of my life. Now for the reveal. I didn't want a scene. I wanted something surgical, precise. I decided on a formal letter sent from the management office of my LLC to the CEO of the company, with a copy to David as head of operations. The letter was perfectly professional. It announced the change in ownership. It assured them of a smooth transition. It included a link to the new portal for submitting maintenance requests. And it was signed by me, Sarah Jones, managing member and owner. I had my lawyer send it on a Friday afternoon at 4:55 p.m. Let it ruin their weekend. I got the phone call on Monday morning. It was the CEO's personal assistant. Her voice was strained, overly polite. "Ms. Jones, Mr. Evans would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience to discuss the new relationship." We met in the same boardroom where it had all ended. But this time everything was different. I didn't have a cardboard box, I had a leather portfolio. I didn't sit across the table. I was ushered to the head of the table. David was there flanking the CEO. His face was a mask of pale shock. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at the table at the same fake wood grain. The CEO, Mr. Evans, was all smiles and handshakes. Sarah, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea you were moving into commercial real estate. Congratulations. I smiled a thin, polite smile. Thank you, Robert. It seemed like a good opportunity. The meeting was a masterclass in forced deference. They talked about the great working relationship had they assured me of their commitment to being excellent tenants. David finally spoke, his voice tight. Yes, we look forward to a productive partnership. Of a circle closing. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. After he spoke, I looked directly at him. A productive partnership requires mutual respect. David, don't you agree? He swallowed hard. Absolutely. That was the first board meeting, the first of many. As the landlord, I had a seat at the table for any decisions regarding the physical space. I used that seat. I proposed new standards for building maintenance for common areas. I approved a renovation of the lobby, making it brighter, more welcoming. I insisted on a new, more equitable vendor policy for the cafeteria. Small things. But they shifted the culture. The oppressive, cold feeling I remembered started to thaw. It was no longer David's kingdom. It was my building. The final reflection came to me much later. I was walking through the lobby, after meeting with the new cafe owners. I saw a young intern looking lost and nervous, just like I had on my first day. Someone stopped to help her. The atmosphere was different. It was better. I realized that true belonging isn't something someone else grants you. It's not a membership card given by a boss. It's something you build for yourself. And sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn enough, you can build it so strong that it becomes the foundation for others too. I didn't just get revenge. I transformed the place of my deepest professional humiliation into a monument to my own resilience. The injustice wasn't just avenged, it was recycled into something fairer. And every time I walk through those doors, I remember that power isn't about shouting someone down, it's about owning the room they're standing in. The day it happened, the air in his office was stale, recycled. You know that feeling, the hum of the air conditioner, the two bright fluorescent lights. He sat behind that enormous desk, a slab of polished wood that was meant to be a barrier. And he said the words. They weren't shouted, they were calm. Deliberate. Your position has been eliminated. Standard corporate language. But then he leaned forward just a little and added the real reason, the personal one. He said my vision for the company was, and I remember the phrase, exactly, unrealistic and ultimately detrimental. Now most people would hear that and think lawsuit, wrongful termination, constructive dismissal. And maybe they'd be right. My lawyer certainly thought so. When I called him that evening, he was already talking about depositions, about discovery, about building a case. But as I sat there listening to him outline a year-long battle that would drain my savings and my spirit, I had a different thought, a clearer one. Litigation is a war of attrition. It's about proving you were wronged. It's defensive. It accepts the frame of the battle that your opponent has set. I didn't want to prove I was wronged. I wanted to change the entire board. Revenge through the courts is messy, emotional. And it gives your opponent a platform. They get to defend themselves, they get a say. But acquisition, that's a different kind of power. It's quiet, it's financial, it's a checkmate they never see coming. It's not about proving a point, it's about becoming the. I waited a week. I wanted the ownership records to be fully processed. I wanted there to be no doubt. Then I wrote the letter. It was brief, perfectly professional. It was from the new ownership entity, informing the CEO of the company, David, of the change in ownership, and requesting a meeting to discuss the future of the lease and building operations. I signed it with my name, my real name, not the shell company. I dropped it off with the front desk security, a sealed envelope marked for his eyes only. The goal wasn't just to own the building, it was to own the ground they stood on, to restructure the very concept of power in our relationship. He would no longer be my boss, he would be my tenant. The first 48 hours are critical. It's not about action, it's about inaction. You have to let the initial shockwave pass through you. The anger is a fuel, but you can't let it blow up the engine. I went for long walks. I didn't talk to anyone about it, except my wife. And even then I kept the strategy to myself. I needed my mind clear. I needed to shift from a reactive state, hurt, me, to a strategic one. How? do I win that mindset is everything, it's the foundation, without it y'all make emotional decisions, y'all tip your hand. So step 1, the investigation. I needed to know who actually owned the building we worked in. Most employees never think about this, it's just the office. But that information is almost always public. I started online. The county assessor's office has a website you can search by address. It took me about 10 minutes. The building wasn't owned by my company. It was owned by a limited liability company, something like 234 Main Street Holdings LLC. That's common. It's a way to shield assets. So I did a business entity search for that LLC, another public database. And there it was. The registered agent was a law firm. I recognized a firm that did a lot of work for my former company. It was a shell, but it was their shell. This was good. It meant the asset was tied directly to them. Next, I needed to understand the value. The county site gave me the appraised value for tax purposes, but that's often lower than market value. I looked up recent commercial sales in the area. What were similar buildings selling for per square foot? Then, I thought about their lease. I'd seen it before. It was a long-term lease with 5 years left. That's a huge factor for a buyer. A building with a stable long-term tenant is a much safer investment. It means immediate, predictable cash flow. I did the math. The estimated market value was within a range that, while huge, wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility for me. That was the feasibility question. Can you realistically afford it? I looked at my own finances, savings, investments, retirement funds. You have to be very careful about tapping those. I knew I wouldn't be able to do this alone. I'd need financing. But the numbers on paper started to make sense. The property could potentially pay for itself through the rent. This is where you build your team. You cannot do this alone. A commercial real estate agent was my first call. Not just any agent, but one who specialized in office buildings. I found one through a referral. I was upfront with her. I said, I want to buy a specific building, and I need to do it discreetly. She understood immediately. Her job was to be my guide, to know the market intimately, and to handle negotiations without revealing my identity. Then a lawyer, a good commercial real estate attorney, is non-negotiable. Their job is to look at the purchase agreement, to do the title search, to make sure there are no liens on the property, to handle the closing. This team is your insulation. They are the professionals who make the process run smoothly while you stay in the background. Securing financing is the biggest hurdle. A commercial loan is different from a residential mortgage. The bank looks at the property itself as the primary collateral. They want to see that the income from the building, the rent, will cover the loan payments. This is where that long-term lease became my best asset. I went to a local bank that I had a previous relationship with, not the huge national bank my company used. I presented it as a straightforward investment opportunity. I showed them the financials. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning. I wore a simple, expensive suit. I arrived early. I didn't go to my old floor. I went straight to the executive reception. The assistant's eyes widened slightly. When I gave my name, she buzzed, David. I heard his voice tinny through the intercom. Send them. And he was standing by his window, his back to the door. When I entered, he turned around with a practiced, welcoming smile. It froze on his face. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, not understanding. The smile faltered. Purchase price, the current lease income, the operating expenses for the building. I didn't mention my history with the tenant. It was irrelevant to the bank's risk assessment. They cared about the numbers. And because the numbers were solid, they approved the loan. I also looked into a SBA loan, which can have good terms for owner-occupied commercial property. But since I didn't plan to occupy it, that wasn't an option. The key is to have your financial documents in order: tax returns, bank statements, and present a calm, professional case. This isn't about emotion, it's about return on investment. Making the offer, my agent handled this. The offer was made through the LLC that owned the building, so it went to their law firm. We structured it to be attractive: a quick closing, a minimal number of contingencies. The biggest strategic decision was whether to reveal myself. We decided not yet let them think it's just an investment group. This prevents them from getting emotional and rejecting the offer out of pride. The negotiation was typical. They countered on price. We met in the middle. The purchase agreement was signed, and we entered the due diligence period. The closing process is a lot of waiting and paperwork. My lawyer was essential here. He reviewed every document. The title search came back clean. The inspection revealed a few minor issues with the roof, which we used to negotiate a small price reduction. Then finally, The closing date arrived. I sat in a title company office with my lawyer and signed what felt like a mountain of papers. And then it was done. The keys, metaphorically speaking, were mine. I was the legal owner. The deed was recorded in my name, or rather in the name of a new LLC I had set up to hold the property. That's an important step for liability protection. Now for the leverage. This is the part you've been waiting for. The legal rights and responsibilities of being a landlord are defined by the lease, but also by state law. I had my lawyer review their existing lease with a fine-tooth comb. As the new owner, I was now the landlord. I had to honor the terms of that lease. But the lease was my blueprint for power. The first thing I did was send a formal letter on my new LLC's letterhead to the company's CEO. It was a standard notification of change in ownership, along with instructions for where to send the rent check each month. I didn't sign it with my name. I let the LLC signature block do the talking. The moment of revelation came a few days later. My phone rang. It was my former boss. His voice was different, not angry, but confused, wary. He said, "I received a letter about the building." I let the silence hang for a second, then I said yes. I thought it was a solid investment. The silence on his end was absolute. That was the victory, not a shout, not a lawsuit, but that quiet, dawning realization on the other end of the phone. Then we got to renegotiating. The lease had 5 years left, but it had options, and those options were contingent on the landlord's approval. When the time came to discuss the renewal, I had leverage. I could choose not to renew. I could force them to move. That's a massive, expensive disruption for a company, so we sat down. I was able to negotiate more favorable terms, a higher rent, yes, but also stricter clauses about maintenance responsibilities, about alterations to the space. I became the one setting the died rules. The power dynamic had completely, irrevocably flipped. The long-term financial benefits are significant. Every month the rent check comes in. That rent pays the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, and it puts money in my pocket. I am building equity in a tangible asset. In 10 years I'll own a valuable piece of property outright, with a stable tenant. It's created a new income stream that is entirely separate from my job. It turned a professional setback into a foundational financial opportunity. My final advice is this: when you get hit, your instinct is to hit back directly, but sometimes the most powerful move is to step to the side and change the game entirely. Look at your situation, not just as a victim, but as an investor. What assets are in play? What are the underlying financial structures? Use the system, use public records, use commercial law, use the principles of finance. Build a quiet professional team, and make your move not out of anger, but out of a cold, calculated strategy. For long-term gain, that's how you turn a termination into a foundation. You don't just get revenge, you get a building. You know the words "you don't belong here." They don't just hit your ears and bounce off, they sink in. They find a home deep inside you, in a place you didn't even know was vulnerable. At first you feel the heat, the sting of the insult. But that fades. What's left is a cold, heavy weight, a confirmation of every secret fear you ever had about yourself, that little voice in your head, the one that whispers you're not smart enough, not good enough, that you're just faking it. That voice suddenly has a microphone. It's not a whisper anymore, it's a shout echoing in your mind, and it's using his voice. Imposter syndrome isn't a strong enough term for it. This was an imposter epidemic. Every email I sent, I'd read it over 10 times, questioning every word. Every meeting I walked into, I felt like a trespasser. I was constantly waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, "All right, the jig is up. We all know you're not one of us." The danger is so subtle. It's not that you start failing at your job, it's that you start believing that any success you have is a fluke, a lucky break. You begin to attribute your achievements to chance, while taking full personal ownership of every tiny mistake. You internalize the narrative, and it becomes the script for your own life. You start acting the part of the person who doesn't belong, and that more than anything else makes it true. The turning point didn't come in a flash of lightning. It was a slow, dawning realization, in the dead of night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. This is a choice I am making, a choice to believe him. I am giving this man, this one person, total authority over my sense of worth. And what had he ever done to earn that authority? What had he built besides a career on the backs of people he looked down on? That was the shift, the reframing. It stopped being a verdict on my worth and started being a diagnosis of his character. The statement, "You don't belong here," stopped being about me and started being about the smallness of the world. He lived in a world with such rigid, tiny borders that he felt the need to guard them. It was a reflection of his own insecurity, his own fear, that someone like me might actually show him up. That was the moment I took the power back. I rejected the label, I tore up the script. But rejecting the label is just the first step, it's a declaration of war. But you have no army, you have to build yourself from the ground up. The anger. Was there a hot, sharp thing in my chest? But anger is volatile, it can burn you up, or it can explode outward and destroy everything. I had to learn to control it, to channel it. It became my fuel, every snide comment, every dismissive glance. I didn't swallow it anymore, I converted it. It became another log on the fire, heating the engine of my. "Hello, David," I said. My voice was calm, steady. Focus. I developed what I call a fortress mentality. The negativity, the doubt, the naysayers, they were all outside the walls. My mind was the fortress. I built the walls thick and high, not to keep people out entirely, but to control what I let in. Only useful information got through, only facts, only the next step in the plan. The insults, and the jealousy, and the gossip, they just rattled against the stone and fell away. Resilience isn't about not feeling the blows. It's about having a structure that can absorb the impact without collapsing. And inside that fortress I built a cinema. And on the screen I played one movie over and over. I visualized the outcome, not in a vague, "I'll be rich" kind of way. I visualized the specific moment. The feel of the leather chair in the corner office. That was now mine. The view from the window, the weight of the keys in my hand. The quiet of the building after everyone had left. I could taste the silence. That vision was my anchor on the days when the fortress felt more like a prison, when the loneliness of the mission was overwhelming. I'd close my eyes and go to that place. It was realer than the cubicle I was sitting in. I couldn't have done it completely alone, though the fortress needs a gate. And you have to let a few trusted souls inside. For me, it was my partner and one old friend from college. I didn't burden them with every single doubt, but I let them in on the mission. Their belief in me, when I was having a hard time believing in myself, was like a generator kicking on blackout. It provided the light to keep me going until my own power came back on. They were the keepers of the why, reminding me of the goal when I got lost in the how. Then comes the execution. This is where theory meets reality, and reality has a way of testing your newfound confidence. The psychology of negotiation is everything. You're sitting across the table from lawyers, from bankers, from people who do this for a living, and the whole time you have this secret, a position of hidden strength that they know nothing about. It's not arrogance, it's a deep, calm certainty. Because you're not negotiating for a salary bump or a better title. You're negotiating for your future, for your vindication. That purpose gives you a steadiness. They can't understand. You can make calm, rational decisions while they're fighting over ego and percentages. You see the whole board while they're focused on their individual pieces. But the fear of failure is a constant companion. It's the cold knot in your stomach when you sign a document that puts everything on the line. What if the plan doesn't work? What if you've misjudged everything? What if he was right all along, and you're about to prove it to the world in the most spectacular, humiliating way possible? You manage it by breaking it down. The ultimate failure is too big to contemplate, so you focus on the failure of the next phone call, the next meeting. You give yourself permission to fail at a step, because a step can be corrected. The plan is agile, the goal is rigid. The biggest moment of doubt came the night before the purchase was finalized. I was alone in my apartment, and the enormity of the commitment was like a physical pressure on my chest. The debt, responsibility, the lives of everyone who worked there. What had I done? This wasn't a game anymore, this was real. I almost picked up the phone to call it all off. But in that panic, I had to reaffirm my purpose. I went back to the why. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that belonging isn't something granted by others, it's something you build. It was about creating a place where no one else would ever be made to feel the way I had been made to feel. That why was my compass. It recalibrated me. It pushed me through the terror. The transformation, it's difficult to put into words. The feeling of the reveal when I finally sat behind that desk, and he was called, and it wasn't schadenfreude. It was deeper than pleasure at his discomfort. It was a profound, quiet validation. It was the universe, or my own relentless effort, confirming that the arc of justice, even personal justice, can indeed bend. It was the feeling of a scales finally being balanced. After years of being tilted, that experience rewires you, your self-perception. He just stared. What are you doing here? Undergoes a fundamental shift. You are no longer an employee. You are no longer just trying to earn a place at a table someone else built. You built the table. You are an owner. The transition from victim to victor isn't about defeating someone else. It's about defeating the version of yourself that believed the lie, the lasting change is this unshakable understanding that belonging is self-defined. You don't audition for a place in the world, you carve it out, you build your own room, and you decide who gets in. Invitation, the confidence it gives you isn't loud or boastful, it's a quiet steel in your spine. You know that you have faced one of the biggest psychological challenges. There is the dismantling of your own limiting beliefs, and you not only survived, you built something new. From the rubble, my advice for building an unshakable mindset for any challenge is to start with your internal narrative. You are the only one who gets to write the story of who you are. When someone tries to hand you a script, read it critically, ask who benefits from you believing it, channel your rawest emotions into disciplined action, build your fortress. But remember to let in a few people you trust. Visualize your success with such clarity that it feels like a memory of something that has already happened, and most importantly, define your own belonging. Your worth is not up for debate, it's a fact. Once you operate from that truth, there is very little in this world that can truly stand in your way. So picture this, it's a Tuesday, which honestly should have been my first clue. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. The office hums with its usual soul-crushing vibe. The fluorescent lights are buzzing, someone's microwave is reheating fish, and Gary from accounting is breathing through his mouth again. You know, a standard day at the salt mines. And then my phone buzzes, an email from the boss, subject line, quick chat. Now, in the corporate hierarchy, a quick chat from the big cheese is never about how much he appreciates your stapling technique. It's the equivalent of a mob boss asking you to take a ride to the Jersey wetlands. My stomach did this little flip-flop thing. I thought, okay, maybe he finally noticed the cost-saving measures I suggested last quarter. Maybe I'm getting a promotion, a raise, a commemorative plaque. So I walk into his office. It's all glass walls so everyone can see you getting humiliated. It's like a fishbowl of failure. And there he is, Brent with his standing desk, his ergonomic keyboard, and his framed poster of a cat hanging from a branch that says, hang in there. He's on a video call. But he's not talking, he's just nodding very seriously, like he's receiving vital intelligence from the Pentagon. I stand there for a solid minute, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. He finally mutes himself and turns to me. He doesn't offer me a seat, he just gestures at the air in front of his desk. So I'm standing there like a kid who got caught drawing on the walls. And he launches into this monologue. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon, a symphony of nonsense. He's talking about synergistic forward momentum and pivoting our human capital resources. I am nodding along, trying to look like I understand what any of that means. But internally, my brain is just screaming, get to the point, you human. PowerPoint presentation. And then he leans forward, steeples his fingers, and says, we've decided to go in a different direction. Ah, the classic. The corporate, it's not you, it's us. Except it's absolutely you. I am waiting for the punchline. Did I mess up the Thompson account? Was my quarterly report not sufficiently sparkly? I believe we have a meeting, I said, gesturing to the conference table in the corner of his office about the building. No, it was the font. He pulls up a presentation on his giant monitor, my presentation, the one from the last board meeting, and he zooms in on a bullet point. You used Comic Sans, he says, and his voice is deadly serious, like he's just uncovered a spy for the third quarter projections. It's unprofessional, it lacks gravitas, it whispers child's birthday party, not multi-million-dollar merger. I just stared. Comic Sans. I didn't use Comic Sans. I used, well, I think it was Arial, maybe it was Calibri, who even knows the difference. But he was adamant. He said it sent the wrong message, that it undermined the brand's core integrity. He said, and I quote, a company's typography is its handshake with the world, and apparently my handshake was a wet floppy fish made of Comic Sans. So he fires me right there. For a faun, I was so stunned I didn't even argue. I just turned around to leave, and of course my dignity had to make a final dramatic exit. My foot caught on the leg of his stupid standing desk. I didn't fall, but I did this kind of stutter step lurching motion right into his trash. Can send a bunch of crumpled up mission statements. Flying, I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself, looked back, and gave a weak little wave, not to him, to his stupid sad-looking fiddle leaf. Fig plant in the corner, I whispered, see you on the other side, buddy, and walked out. The walk of shame back to my desk was brutal. Everyone was pretending not to look, but you could feel the eyes. The quiet clicks of keyboards got even quieter. I had to pack my stuff into a cardboard box. It's the most cliché thing in the world, but it's real. You're just standing there putting your half-dead succulent and your world's best employee mug into a box that once held reams of printer paper. It's humiliating. So then began the what do I do now phase. It's a two-act play. Act 1, the grieving process. This involves a lot of sweatpants, a gallon of Rocky Road ice cream, and a deep, profound dive into the bottomless well of bad reality television. I am talking about shows where people argue over wedding cakes and swap spouses. You reach a point where you're not even watching for entertainment, you're watching for anthropological research. Like, is this really what's happening out there? Meanwhile, my email inbox is a ghost town. My phone doesn't ring. You start to feel like you've been unplugged from the matrix, and it's surprisingly quiet. Act 2 is the boredom phase. You run out of shows to binge. You've reorganized your spice rack twice. You start doing things you'd never normally do, like actually reading the newsletters that clog your inbox. That's how it happened. I was scrolling through a real estate email, just looking at pictures of houses I could never afford. It's a fun, masochistic little game. And then I saw it, a commercial listing, prime office space available. And the address, it was my old building, my old floor, Brent's office. I laughed out loud. It was a bitter, choked sort of laugh. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I showed the listing to my cat. He was unimpressed. But the idea, it just stuck in my head. It was a ridiculous, impossible fantasy, like buying the castle your evil king just banished you from. But then I got to thinking my severance package was decent, not buy a yacht decent, but maybe, just maybe, buy a single overpriced office suite out of pure spite decent. I did some very rough back-off-the-napkin math. It was insane, it was ludicrous, it was technically possible. But then he leaned forward, he closed the folder, and his voice dropped all the pretense. It became flat, cold, final. He said, look, I am going to be blunt. It's become clear to me, and to others, that you don't belong here. I saw the pieces click into place in his mind, the letter, the new owner, my presence. The color drained from his face. He actually took a half step back, leaning against the window ledge. For support. It was you, he whispered. It wasn't a question, really, it was a dawning horror. That was the hold my coffee moment. I wasn't even drinking coffee, I was drinking lukewarm tea. But the spirit was there. I just thought, what's the worst that could happen? They say no. I am already unemployed, my credit score is already a tragedy. So I picked up the phone. I called the realtor's number listed on the ad. My heart was pounding. I was sitting there in my pajama pants, with cartoon pancakes on them, trying to sound like a serious high-level investor. The realtor, a woman named Brenda with a voice that could sell sand in the desert, was lovely. I told her I represented a new venture capital firm. I made up a name on the spot, Vengeance Properties LLC. I swear I said that, it just fell out of my mouth. There was a pause on the other end. I thought I'd blown it. But then she just said, okay, great name, very assertive. When would you like to see the space? The next week was like being a secret agent in a very, very boring spy movie. This was the undercover phase. I had to go to a building inspection, me, a guy who can barely fix a leaky faucet, nodding sagely, while a contractor talked about load-bearing walls and HVAC systems. I am just nodding, saying things like, yes, the structural integrity seems integral. And then the nightmare scenario, walking into the lobby. And who do I see? Sarah from marketing, my old work friend. She's waving, she's coming over. My blood runs cold. Hey, what are you doing here? She asks, all smiles. I panic. I blurt out, I am here for a job interview on a different floor. A flawless lie, she buys it. We make small talk for what feels like an eternity. The whole time I am expecting Brent to come around the corner, pointing a finger and yelling, imposter. But he doesn't. I survive the encounter, sweating through my one good shirt. The fear of discovery was constant. Every time my phone rang, I was sure it was Brenda, the realtor, saying, we know who you are, the jig is up. When it came time to sign the preliminary paperwork, I met her in a coffee shop. I was so nervous my hand was shaking. I almost dropped the pen. I signed my name with a flourish that I hoped conveyed mysterious tycoon, and not guy who just lost a fight with a pen. That night I celebrated. I bought a bottle of cheap champagne from the corner store and drank it straight from the bottle while sitting on my floor. It was the most triumphant I'd ever felt. Then came the big day, the closing, the moment of truth. I signed about 1,000 documents, my hand cramped. And then it was done. I was the proud owner of 1,200 square feet of prime office space, formerly known as Brent's Kingdom. Now for the reveal. I couldn't just send a normal email. That would be too simple. This required flair. I thought about a singing telegram. But that felt a bit much. Instead, I crafted the most casual, breezy email of all time. The subject line was a quick update. I loved that poetic justice. The body of the email went something like this. Hi Brent, hope you're well. Just a quick heads up on behalf of Vengeance Properties LLC. We recently acquired the building at address. Wanted to personally inform you that your lease is of course safe and sound. We're looking forward to a great landlord-tenant relationship. Also, I've noticed the landscaping out front could use a little TLC maybe. We can discuss that at our next check-in. All the best, your new landlord. It was me, I said, taking a seat at the table. Shall we begin? I hit send and I waited for about 30 seconds. Then my phone started ringing. It was Brent. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. Then the emails started. They were glorious masterpieces of incoherent rage. They started with "What is the meaning of this?" and devolved into "This is a hostile takeover." And finally, "We need to talk. Call me." The punctuation got progressively worse. It was like watching a man have a stroke via Gmail. The final step, of course, was exercising my new landlord privileges. This was the petty revenge portion of our program. And I leaned into it. I sent a formal letter on official Vengeance Properties letterhead, informing him that due to a reevaluation of parking space allocations, his designated spot was being reassigned. He was being moved to the spot farthest from the door right next to the dumpsters. I cited logistical streamlining. I also enforced a little-known clause in the lease about window decorations. I demanded he take down the "Hang in There Cat" poster, as it violated the building's aesthetic standards. I said it was visually abrasive and demotivating. He actually tried to argue about it. We had a whole email chain. It was beautiful. So what's the moral of the story? Well, they say living well is the best revenge. I disagree. I think buying your boss' office after he fires you over a font is the best revenge. It's not about the money, it's about the punchline. It's about turning your own professional humiliation into a joke that you get to tell for the rest of your life. It's about the sheer unadulterated absurdity of it all. Sometimes life gives you lemons, sometimes life fires you for using Comic Sans. And when that happens, you don't just make lemonade, you buy the whole lemonade stand and charge your old boss double for a cup. The phrase was always culture fit. That's what they called it. We're not sure you're the right culture fit. It sounds so neutral, doesn't it? Like a matter of taste, like you prefer vanilla, and I prefer chocolate. But after the third or fourth time you hear it in different rooms from different people, who all look the same, you start to understand the real dictionary. Culture fit is the corporate-approved synonym. The real meaning is you don't belong here. And you is your skin color, you is your accent, you is the neighborhood you grew up in, the school you couldn't afford, the way you wear your hair, the pronouns you use, you is anything that disrupts the comfortable, homogeneous echo chamber they've built. I spent years learning the grammar of that other language, the language of exclusion. I became a fluent speaker. Code switching wasn't just a skill, it was a survival tactic. I had a work voice, a vocabulary I only used in the office. I had a work laugh, a little softer, a little more polite. I curated my interests. I learned about golf, about wines I couldn't pronounce, about vacation spots I'd never see. I sanded down my edges. I made myself smaller, quieter, less me. And the most exhausting part wasn't the work was easy. The exhausting part was the performance, the constant draining vigilance of making sure the mask never slipped. Every meeting was a stage, every conversation was a test I had to pass. And the grade was always "You're almost there, but not quite." The moment it all crystallized for me wasn't in a big dramatic confrontation. It was in the break room. A senior partner was talking about his weekend, a sailing trip. He turned to me and said, "You wouldn't understand, this is probably outside your world." He said it with a smile, a friendly, dismissive smile. And everyone else smiled too. It was a tiny thing, a paper cut. But it was the 1,000th paper cut. And I just started bleeding out right there standing by the coffee machine. I looked at their faces all. That meeting was a masterpiece of controlled power. I didn't gloat, I didn't raise my voice. I was all business. I laid out the new terms. There would be building-wide reviews of all management policies, starting with HR. I talked about fostering a more inclusive and equitable workplace environment, as the new ownership believed that a building's value was tied to the well-being of its tenants. I mentioned casually that I'd be taking a seat on the building's oversight committee, which would have a direct line to the board of. Nodding in agreement, they didn't even see what they had done. The problem wasn't me. I wasn't broken. I wasn't deficient. The problem was the environment, the air in the room was toxic for anyone who wasn't them, and I had been trying so hard to build a resistance to the poison when I should have just left the room. I didn't want to just leave, though leaving would mean they won. It would mean the system worked exactly as designed. It filtered me out. I didn't want to sue them. That felt like asking for a seat at a table that was rotten to its core. I didn't want a seat, I wanted to build a new table, a better one. And I realized I had a weapon they would understand perfectly: capitalism. They valued profit above all else. So I would use that. I would become a competitor they couldn't ignore. And then I would become their landlord. The plan was insane. I had no family money, no trust fund. What I had was an idea, and a community that was just as tired as I was. I started talking not to venture capitalists in glass towers, but to local business owners, to community leaders, to friends of friends who had been shut out of traditional funding. I pitched the vision. This wasn't just about starting a company. It was about creating a proof of concept, a place where diversity wasn't a metric to be reported, but the foundation of how we operated, where inclusion wasn't a training module, but the oxygen in the room. I found investors who believed in the mission, people who saw the economic power in tapping into overlooked talent, in serving underserved markets. We weren't asking for a place at the table, we were building a new restaurant, and we were going to have a better menu. The goal was never revenge. Revenge is a small, bitter thing. This was about reclamation. It was about taking the power they held over meth, power to define my worth, to decide if I belonged, and dismantling it completely. The acquisition of the firm that fired me, the very building I was escorted out of, that was just the mechanism, the platform. It gave me a microphone I never would have had otherwise. It gave me a lever to move the entire system. The first day as the new owner, I didn't go to the corner office. I went to the HR department. I asked for the policy binder. We started an immediate top-to-bottom audit of every single rule, every hiring practice, every promotion track. We brought in external consultants, real experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, not the ones who just check a box. We tore up the old playbook. We implemented blind recruitment processes for entry-level positions. We established clear, transparent criteria for promotions, so it wasn't just about who played golf with the boss. We created mentorship programs that specifically paired senior leaders with employees from underrepresented backgrounds, not as a charity case, but as an investment. We made unconscious bias training mandatory, starting with the executive team, and I sat in every single one of those sessions. Then we looked at the building itself. It housed dozens of other companies, all tenants. We drafted a tenant bill of rights. It outlined the minimum standards for any company that wanted to lease space from us. It covered things like parental leave pay, equity reviews, clear anti-harassment protocols. Some of the existing tenants pushed back, of course. They said it was overreach. They said we were interfering with their business. My response was simple: this is our building, these are our standards. If you want to be here, you meet them. If not, there are plenty of other buildings. We weren't just managing property, we were curating a community. Any tenant company, his face was a mask of forced deference. He kept nodding, saying, of course, and we look forward to collaborating. But his eyes were terrified. He knew that every decision he made, every email he sent, was now happening under my roof, literally. Being a changemaker from the outside is one thing. You're a critic, a protester. Being one from the inside is a much more complex challenge. You face a different kind of resistance. The quiet sabotage, the "we've always done it this way" chorus, the people who smile to your face and then work to undermine the new policies. I had to learn to be a leader, not just a visionary. It meant making hard decisions. It meant holding people accountable, even when it was difficult. It meant listening to criticism, even from people I disagreed with, and separating the valid points from the bad faith arguments. The transformation wasn't going to happen with a memo. It was a daily grinding effort. The ripple effects started small. An employee from one of the tenant companies, a young woman, she emailed me. She said that after she saw the new standards we'd implemented, she went to her own manager and asked for a pay equity review. And she got it. And she got a raise. That was one person. Then it was a group of employees at a marketing firm down the hall who collectively asked for a more flexible work policy, citing our company as an example. They got it. Two people who had felt powerless started to see a blueprint. They saw that change was possible. It gave them the language, the courage to ask for what they deserved. It wasn't about inspiring them to leave. It was about empowering them to demand better right where they were. We decided to make the story public not as a boast, but as a case study. We published the numbers, not just the financials, but the diversity metrics, the employee satisfaction scores, the retention rates for minority employees. We showed the direct correlation between an inclusive culture and increased innovation, better problem-solving, higher profitability. We used our story to advocate for corporate accountability. We spoke at conferences, not just about the moral imperative, but about the business imperative. We showed that discrimination isn't just wrong, it's bad for the bottom line, and that finally is a language that every boardroom understands. So how do I measure success now? It's not on a balance sheet, it's in the hallway conversations. It's in seeing employees who look like me, who sound like me, who don't feel the need to code switch anymore. It's in the fact that the phrase culture fit has been officially removed from our hiring vocabulary. We look for culture add, what can you bring to this team that we're missing? Success is the quiet hum of a workplace where people can finally do their jobs without also performing a role. This is the call to action. Look around your own workplace, listen to the unspoken rules, decode the language of fit, identify the systemic exclusion. Because it's there, in the patterns, in the promotions that never happen, in the ideas that are always credited to someone else. You don't have to buy the company you work for, but you can start asking the hard questions. You can mobilize with your colleagues. You can support businesses that are doing it right. You can use your own power, however small it feels, to challenge the system. The goal isn't to tear everything down, it's to build something better, something stronger, something truly inclusive. Right in the footprint of the old, they told me I didn't belong, so I built a place where belonging is the whole point. The funny thing is, I never felt like I was building my own career. Not really. From the moment I got my first real job, it felt like I was carrying something, a weight, a hope. My grandfather, he came to this country with a single suitcase and a pair of shoes that were too thin for the winters here. He worked in a factory that made textiles. My grandmother cleaned offices, not fancy offices, just regular buildings. Downtown shed. Tell me stories about emptying the wastebaskets, about seeing the framed. The first official board meeting as the owner was something else. I walked into the room, and the conversation just stopped. These were the same people who had watched me walk that walk of shame. Now they were falling over themselves to shake my hand. David sat at the head of the table, but it was clear who held the real power. I didn't sit in his seat. I took a different one. I listened more than I talked. But when I did speak about implementing new mentorship programs or revising the promotion criteria to be more degrees on the walls, wondering what it would be like to have a desk of her own in a place like that, their entire lives were about making sure their children and then their grandchildren wouldn't have to do that. The dream was simple. It wasn't about being a millionaire. It was about belonging, about having a place in the world that was secure, that was yours, ownership, not just of things, but of your own destiny. My grandfather would say, in the old country, the land owned you, here you can own your peace. He never did, though. He worked until his hands were stiff, and he rented a small apartment his whole life. That dream, it got passed down to my father. And then it landed on me when I got the job at Sterling Ventures. When I walked into that skyscraper with my new suit, I felt it. I felt like I was finally planting a flag on their behalf. Every promotion, every bonus, it wasn't just my success, it was a collective exhale from 3 generations. I remember calling my dad after I closed my first big deal. I told him the number, and there was just silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Your grandfather would be so proud." That was the point, that was the whole point. So when Mr. Sterling called me into his office that day, I wasn't nervous. I thought it was about another promotion, the corner office. Maybe he sat behind that enormous desk, not even looking at me, just staring out the window at the city. And he said the words so calmly, "We're restructuring, your position is being eliminated, HR has your package." It was like all the air was sucked out of the room. It wasn't just a job loss. It was an eviction. He was telling me that I didn't belong, that after all that work, mine and my family's, I was still on the outside. The foundation I thought I'd built my entire adult life on just crumbled into dust. I walked out of that building feeling like I had betrayed my grandfather's memory, like I had failed at the one thing I was supposed to accomplish. For weeks, I just drifted. The shame was a physical weight. I couldn't face my family. I'd make excuses for why I wasn't going to work. I started looking through old photo albums, just to feel some connection to something solid. There was a picture of my grandmother standing outside a building with her cleaning cart. She looked so young. And she had this tired smile. I'd seen that picture 100 times, but I never really looked at the building behind her. It was an old Art Deco building with distinctive zigzag patterns near the top. I stared at it for a long time. There was something familiar about it. And then it hit me. It was the same building, the very same one I had just been fired from Sterling Ventures. Was only a recent tenant. The building itself was much older. My grandmother had cleaned its offices 50 years ago. It felt like a sign, a brutal, heartbreaking sign. This place that had represented the pinnacle of my family's aspirations was the same place that had employed my grandmother to scrub its floors, the same place that had just cast me out. I went down to the city archives, started pulling records. I found her name on old payroll documents. I found my grandfather's name too. He'd done some temporary work moving furniture into the building. When it was first built, this wasn't just an office building, it was a monument to my family's struggle. Every scuff on the floor, every mark on the wall, it held a piece of our story. And Sterling, he was just a temporary occupant, a ghost. The idea didn't form all at once. It started as a flicker, a what if. What if the building itself was the enemy? What if the enemy was the temporary power that resided within it? What if buying it wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of reclamation, of finally truly taking ownership of the narrative? I called my father. I told him the whole story about Grandma's photo, about the archives, about my crazy idea. I expected him to tell me I was being emotional. Instead, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Your grandfather always talked about that building. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He said one day someone from our family would walk through the front door. As an owner, it was like a current passed through the phone line. This wasn't my idea alone, it was a family idea." Transparent, the room was silent. They listened. Generations in the making. We talked about money. He offered what he had, his life savings. My aunt offered some. We weren't rich, but we were determined. It was a collective decision. We were going to pull together, just like they always had, to buy our piece of the story. The process of actually acquiring the building was a nightmare of lawyers and financing. But every time I hit a wall, I'd think about my grandmother climbing the stairs with her heavy cart. Because the service elevator was broken, my problems felt small. The day of the signing, I asked my father to come with me. We sat in the lawyer's office, a quiet wood-paneled room. It was so different from the chaos of Sterling Ventures. This was solemn, sacred almost. As I picked up the pen to sign the papers, my hand was steady. I felt a presence in the room, not a ghost, but a feeling, the weight of all those hopes. It was heavy, but it was a good heavy, like a warm blanket. This wasn't a triumphant moment, it was a moment of responsibility. I was now the caretaker of their dream. First thing I did was change the name. It's no longer the Sterling Tower, it's now the Marisol Building, named after my grandmother. The second thing I did was convert the entire top floor, the floor where Mr. Sterling had his corner office, into a community space. It's a free resource center for first-generation students and immigrants, offering career counseling, language classes, legal aid. We put up a portrait of my grandmother in the lobby. She's smiling, that tired smile. But now she's home. She's not a visitor anymore. The sense of belonging I feel now is nothing like what I felt when I worked there. That was a borrowed belonging, contingent on performance, on the whims of someone like Mr. Sterling. This is permanent. This is rooted. When I walk through the doors now, I don't feel like an employee, or even just an owner. I feel like a descendant. I am walking in the footsteps of my grandmother. I am touching the same banister she polished. The building is no longer just steel and glass. It's a living story, my story, our story. I saw Mr. Sterling once, about a year after I bought it. He was looking for new office space for his firm, and his realtor brought him by. Not knowing the history, I was in the lobby talking to the manager of the community center. I saw him walk in, and he did a double take. The confusion on his face was almost comical. He looked at me, then at the portrait of my grandmother, then back at me. He started to say something, probably some pleasantry about the nice renovation, but I just smiled at him. Genuine smile. I felt no anger, I felt pity. He was just a man passing through. He would always be just a man passing through. This building was never his legacy, it was always meant to be ours. The lesson in all of this is that our deepest motivations are rarely our own. They are whispers from the past, dreams deferred that land in our laps, waiting for the courage to be fulfilled. My ambition wasn't for me, it was for them. And in finally honoring it, I found a belonging deeper than any job could ever provide. Email went out to all of us at 4:59 p.m. on a Friday, a classic move. It wasn't even a personal meeting, just a broadcast message from the CEO. The subject line was bland: organizational restructuring. But the message was clear: our entire division, the creative marketing team, was being dissolved effective immediately. The reason given was a strategic pivot towards more conventional market approaches. They used words like redundant and non-essential. We were a cost-cutting measure. Slowly things began to change in the company, not because I was micromanaging, but because the threat was implicit. The culture of fear David had cultivated began to erode. People started speaking up. In meetings, ambitious projects that had been shot down before got a second look. I heard through the grapevine that several talented people who had left were considering coming back. The building itself, I had the lobby renovated, made it brighter, more open, a place people didn't dread walking into. Line item to be eliminated. We all just sat at our desks. The silence in our section of the office, louder than any noise. We looked at each other, monitors, glowing with the same cold corporate farewell. There was no anger at first, just a shared sinking feeling of disbelief. We were a good team, we delivered results. But to the new leadership, we were just an aesthetic they didn't like. They said our ideas were too niche, that we didn't fit the company's new polished corporate identity, the exact phrase the head of HR used when Maria from graphic design cornered him by the coffee machine was, frankly, your team just doesn't belong here anymore. That phrase hung in the air. It didn't belong to any one of us, it belonged to all of us. It was our collective insult. We ended up at the Rusty Nail, the bar around the corner we sometimes went to for happy hour. But this wasn't happy hour. This was awake. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a low simmering fury. We were all talking over each other, replaying the day, venting about the injustice of it. We'd poured our hearts into that place. And we were dismissed with a form email. The conversation swirled from bitterness to panic about mortgages, and rent from outrage to sheer exhaustion. Then in a lull, Leo, our quietest strategist, who always saw the chessboard 3 moves ahead, put his pint glass down. With a firm thud, he'd been staring at the condensation on the table, not saying much. He looked around at all of us, his eyes sharp. You know what their strategic pivot really is, he said. It's cowardice. They're scared of anything original. They want to be a faceless conglomerate. He paused, letting that sink in. But we aren't faceless. We have skills. We have each other. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping not in volume, but in intensity. They think we don't belong in their building. So what if the building didn't belong to them anymore? What if it belonged to us? It sounded insane, ludicrous, but the look on his face wasn't joking. It was a spark. And in that dim, noisy bar, surrounded by the people who had just been thrown out together, that spark caught fire. Sarah, our numbers person, immediately started calculating rough figures in her head. Ben, who had a law background, started talking about commercial real estate zoning. Maria was already imagining the new signage. That wild idea born from collective humiliation didn't just linger, it became a mission. Shared mission. It was no longer what if I did something, it was what if we did it together. The next week we got serious. We started meeting at Sarah's apartment, her dining table covered in spreadsheets and legal pads. The first order of business was figuring out what we all brought to the table. It was a kind of inventory of our rebellion. Sarah was our financier. She could dissect a balance sheet in seconds and model cash flow scenarios we didn't even know existed. Ben was our legal and negotiation lead. He understood contracts, liability, the labyrinthine language of commercial. I thought the satisfaction would be in the moment of the reveal, in seeing his face, and that was gratifying. But the real satisfaction came later. It came from walking through the doors, not as an employee begging for belonging, but as the architect of the very space. It came from seeing the environment shift, not because of a mandate from me, but because the foundation of power had been altered. Purchase Leo was the strategist, the big-picture thinker who could anticipate problems and plot our course. Maria was our creative director and branding expert. She would be essential for the property's future. And I handled communications and project management, keeping us all on track and on message. We had to formalize it. We couldn't just be a group of friends with a crazy dream. Ben walked us through creating an LLC, a legal entity for our ambition. We spent a long, tense evening drafting an operating agreement. It wasn't always easy. We had disagreements, fierce ones. How much capital was each person contributing? What percentage of ownership? Did that translate to what happened? If someone wanted out, we had to learn how to argue as partners, not just as former colleagues. We had to listen. Really listen to each other's fears and expectations. The morale would dip sometimes, when a financial projection looked grim or a legal hurdle seemed insurmountable. But then someone would tell a joke about our old boss or we'd order pizza, and remember why we were doing this in the first place. That shared sense of injustice was the glue pooling our severance pay, our savings, even taking small loans against our cars. It was terrifying. But doing it together made the impossible seem, if not easy then, at least achievable. Our combined capital and our combined brains were a force our former employer had completely underestimated. Then came the coordinated strike. It was like planning a heist movie, but with more paperwork. We divided the tasks with precision. Ben took the lead with the commercial realtor, presenting us as a serious investment group, which we had named Phoenix Collective. He handled all the official inquiries, never letting on that we were the very team the current owners had just fired. Sarah worked tirelessly with a small sympathetic bank to secure the rest of the financing, leveraging our business plan, which showed a vibrant multi-tenant creative hub. Leo and Maria conducted deep research into the parent company's financial health, discovering they were highly leveraged and might be motivated to sell the building quickly for a cash infusion. I coordinated it all, setting up meetings, making sure information flowed smoothly between everyone. The secrecy was the hardest part. We couldn't tell anyone, not our families, not our other friends. A single leak could have driven the price up or caused the company to pull the property off the market out of spite. We spoke in code on the phone. We used encrypted messaging. We became a secret society dedicated to our own empowerment. Every small victory felt enormous. When Sarah got the preliminary loan approval, we all met for a silent, triumphant toast with sparkling water. When Ben received draft purchase agreement, we high-fived like we'd won the championship. Each step forward wasn't just a step toward owning a building. It was a step we took together, and it strengthened our bond. The final push was the closing. We all showed up at the title company's office, a united front in our best clothes, sitting around that large wooden table, signing a mountain of documents. It felt surreal. We were doing it. We were actually doing it. The reveal was everything. We didn't do it with a press release or a grand announcement. We did it the way we'd planned everything together. On the day we took possession, we gathered on the front steps of the building, the very place we'd been told we didn't belong. We had a photographer, a friend of Maria's, there to capture it. We held up the giant ceremonial key. The photo said it all, a group of people smiling, triumphant, standing in front of the property they now owned. It was a more powerful, more symbolic act than any one person could have managed. It wasn't a solo revenge fantasy. It was a statement of collective power. True belonging, I realized, isn't something someone else grants you. It's not a spot at a table that can be taken away. It's something you build for yourself brick by brick. It's about creating a space where you and others like you can thrive. David's words were meant to break me, to exile me. Instead, they gave me a purpose. He thought he was defining my limits. He was just showing me the starting line. The revenge wasn't in the ownership. It was in the transformation. It was in taking his small, cruel statement. And we decided early on we wouldn't run it like a traditional corporation. That was the whole point. We set it up as a cooperative. The building, which we now call the Foundry, houses our individual creative businesses on the upper floors, and a shared gallery and event space on the ground floor. We make decisions together. We share expenses. We support each other's clients. The relationships we have now, they're deeper than any workplace friendship. We are partners forged in the fire of a shared setback. We went through a trial by fire and came out the other side, not just as business owners, but as a unit. The message we always come back to, the one we hope others can hear, is that you don't have to go it alone. The system often wants you to feel isolated, to think that success is a solitary climb. But collective action, a real partnership where strengths are combined and weaknesses are supported, can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable to one person. They tried to dismiss us as a group. And as a group, we bought the building out from under them. That's the power of a partner-driven strategy. I spent 20 years building that identity, the business card, the title on my email signature, the way I said I am. With the firm, it was a suit of armor I wore every single day. I thought the building itself, the granite and glass, was an extension of me. I belonged to it. And it belonged to me. That was the illusion, the ego's carefully constructed fortress. The day it happened, the day he called me into that sterile white office, I remember the smell of antiseptic lemon cleaner. He sat behind a desk that was too large for him, and he spoke in this calm, rehearsed tone. The words were about restructuring, redundancy, a necessary evolution. But what they really were was a sledgehammer, a deliberate, precise strike against the foundation of who I thought I was. And for a moment, the ego screamed it was a raw animal panic. What will I do? What will people think? I am nothing without this. The pain was acute, a physical sensation in my chest. It was the sound of an artificial identity, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The suffering was real. But it was a necessary fire. It was the burning away of a false self that had grown too heavy, too constricting. And then a shift, a strange unexpected quiet as I walked out of that office for the last time carrying a cardboard box with a single plant. In it something broke open, not just broke, but broke open the need to belong to that specific place, to that specific title. It just evaporated. It was like taking off a heavy wet coat I'd been wearing for 2 decades. The freedom was terrifying. But it was also immense. It was the freedom of uncertainty, of not knowing what came next, and realizing that not knowing was okay. It was the beginning of surrendering. In the weeks that followed, I didn't fight the current. I didn't rage against what had happened. I didn't update my resume and frantically network. That would have been the old me, the ego trying to rebuild its fortress somewhere else. Instead, I practiced non-action, not laziness, but a kind of purposeful allowing. I woke up without an alarm. I sat in silence for long stretches. I walked without a destination. I released the need to control the narrative of my life. There's an ancient concept, wu wei. It means action through non-action. It's like a river flowing around a rock. It doesn't struggle against the rock. It simply finds the path of least resistance and moves with an effortless power. That's what it felt like. I wasn't struggling upstream anymore. I was allowing myself to be carried. And it was in that state of openness, of quiet receptivity, that the building listing simply appeared. I wasn't looking for it. A friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, called me out, proving on a scale he could never have imagined just how wrong he was. Of the blue, he said he'd heard what happened, and he mentioned, almost as an aside, that the old firm's building had unexpectedly come up for sale. It wasn't a struggle, it was a flow. I trusted the process completely. I focused not on an outcome, but on alignment. Was this next step in alignment with my true self? Or was it just the ego seeking revenge? The acquisition itself felt inevitable. It wasn't a triumphant conquest. It felt more like a natural conclusion, a karmic equation. Finally balancing his actions, his negativity, the energy of dismissal and disregard. He had sown, it had to yield a harvest. I wasn't an angry avenger. I was merely the instrument, the mechanism of balance. I was the consequence he had set in motion, the moment he decided I no longer belonged. When the papers were signed, when the building was legally mine, there was no desire to gloat, no triumphant phone call. I arranged a meeting, neutral ground, a quiet coffee shop. When he arrived, he looked older, weighed down. I didn't smile, I didn't frown, I was simply present. I told him calmly, detachedly, that I had purchased the asset, that the building was under new ownership, and that his company would need to vacate by the end of the month. His face went pale, he sputtered, he tried to summon anger. But it was hollow. I felt no pleasure in his discomfort. I saw it for what it was, his own suffering, self-created, his own negative karma reflecting back at him. He was trapped in a prison of his own making. And I was just the one who had quietly closed the door. My inner peace was undisturbed. This wasn't my drama anymore, it was his. And that's when the ultimate lesson revealed itself. This was never about a building. The building is just stone, and steel a symbol. The real victory was internal. I had spent my life seeking belonging in external things, a job, a title, an office with a view, but true belonging, I finally understood, is found only in one place: alignment with your own purpose. It's an internal state, completely independent of your external circumstances. When you are aligned, you belong to the universe itself. You are home, no matter where you are. The final reflection is this: sometimes being told you don't belong is the greatest gift the universe can give you. It's a harsh, painful, but ultimately merciful correction to your course. That profound pain, that feeling of being cast out, was not a punishment. It was a divine redirection. It was the universe firing the false version of me, so that the true one could finally step forward. It was guiding me with a firm and loving hand away from a place of illusion, and toward the path where I truly, deeply belonged. The journey began with what felt like an ending, but it was the only beginning that mattered. It taught me to trust the journey, even when the path is dark, because the destination is always ultimately yourself. The words didn't even hurt at first. They were like a physical blow that numbs the area. You don't belong here. It was so absolute. It wasn't about my performance. He had to admit my numbers were good. It was about me, my presence, my essence in that space was wrong. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC system, the distant tap-tapping of a keyboard down the hall. Let's begin with the catalyst. It wasn't just the words themselves the Ure fired that hit me. It was the way he said it, the smugness, the implication that I was disposable. And in that moment, you have a choice. The immediate gut reaction is to lash out, to scream, to threaten a lawsuit for wrongful termination. And maybe you'd have a case if you have emails showing discrimination. Or if they violated a contract. That's one thing, but a lawsuit is a war of attrition. It's expensive, it takes years, it drains your spirit, and at the end, even if you win a settlement, you've still lost. You've defined yourself by that conflict. I chose a different path. I chose to turn his insult into my fuel. Revenge through acquisition isn't about anger, it's about strategy. It's about fundamentally changing the chessboard so that you are no longer a piece being moved, but the player who owns the board itself. The goal isn't just to own the building they work in, the goal is to restructure the entire power dynamic. They become your tenant, you become their landlord. That's a permanent shift. The first 48 hours are critical. You have to manage the shock, the humiliation, you have to let yourself feel it. But you cannot let it paralyze you. I went home, and I didn't make any calls, I didn't post anything online, I sat with it. And I made a conscious decision to shift my mindset from victim to strategist. I defined my goal clearly and coldly. I will own the asset that is most critical to their daily operations. I will become their unavoidable business partner. This brings us to the investigation phase. Your first move is one of quiet intelligence gathering. You need to find out who actually owns the building your company leases. This is almost always public information. Start with the county assessor's office or the county recorder's office. Most have online databases. Now you can search by the property address. You're looking for the owner of record. It might be an individual's name, but more likely, it's an LLC, a limited liability company. That's standard practice to protect the actual owner. Once you have the LLC name, you can dig deeper. Many states have Secretary of State websites where you can look up the business filing for that LLC. That might give you the names of the members, the managers. This is how you start to understand who you're dealing with. Is it a large faceless investment fund, or is it a single individual, maybe someone nearing retirement who might be open to selling? Next, you need to assess the property's value. You can look at recent sales of comparable commercial buildings in the area. Commercial real estate websites can give you a rough idea. But more importantly, you need to understand your former company's lease. How long is it? For what are the terms? Is it a triple net lease, where the tenant pays for taxes, insurance, and maintenance? That makes the property a much more attractive hands-off investment. What is the current rent per square foot? This financial data is crucial for your next step. The feasibility study. This is where you get brutally honest with yourself. Can you actually afford this? This isn't like buying a house. Commercial real estate loans work differently. They often require larger down payments, sometimes 25 or 30%. You need to analyze your personal finances, your savings, your assets, your credit score needs. To be strong, you need to ask yourself if you have the stomach for being a landlord, for the potential headaches. But you also need to see the opportunity. The walk back to my desk was the longest of my life. Every head seemed to turn. Did they know? Could they see the humiliation radiating off me? My cubicle felt like a cage. I sat down, my screensaver bouncing around, and I just stared at it. The anger came then, a hot, sharp, clarifying anger. It was a rage that made me want to scream. It was a cold fire, a resolve. He said I didn't belong. Fine. I wouldn't fight for a place at his table. I would build my own table in a building I own. The thought isn't just an expense, it's an acquisition of an income-producing asset. Now the acquisition process. This is where you build your team. You cannot do this alone. You need a commercial real estate agent who knows the local market. They have insights. They know how to value a property accurately. More importantly, you need a lawyer. A good real estate attorney is non-negotiable. They will handle the contracts, the title search, the closing. They are your shield. Securing financing is the next hurdle. You'll approach banks for a commercial loan. You'll need a solid business plan for the property showing the existing lease and the income it generates. The bank isn't just lending to you, they're lending to the property's ability to make money. Sometimes, the seller might even offer financing, which can simplify things. Another option is bringing in a private investor or a partner to share the cost and the risk. But remember, a partner means sharing control. You have to decide how Much of your power move you're willing to dilute. Making the offer your agent will help you craft a competitive bid. The strategy here is often to use a buyer's LLC. You don't want your name on the offer. Not at first, you want to be an anonymous entity. This prevents the seller from knowing your connection to the tenant, which could drive the price up or kill the deal entirely. The seller just wants to sell. They don't need to know your story. Your offer will include the price, the proposed closing date, and any contingencies like a satisfactory building inspection. You navigate the closing process. Your lawyer and the title company do most of the work. There's the inspection to make sure there are no major structural issues. There's the appraisal ordered by the bank. There's the title search to ensure the seller actually owns the property free and clear. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting. But then the day comes, you sign the documents, the money is transferred. And just like that, you are the legal owner. The keys, metaphorically or literally, are yours. Now you get to leverage your new asset. This is the payoff. You are now a landlord. You have legal rights and responsibilities. You must maintain the property, provide a safe environment, and abide by the terms of the existing lease for now. But when that lease is up for renewal, that's when your power is fully realized. You sit down to renegotiate the lease with your former employer. Imagine that meeting, the look on your former boss' face. Now, you can change the terms. You can increase the rent to market rate or above. You can shift more of the operating expenses onto them. You can short the lease term, giving you more frequent opportunities to adjust the deal. You hold all the leverage. Their alternative is to move their entire operation, a massive and expensive undertaking. You have them in a bind. The long-term financial benefits are substantial. While they pay you rent every month, you are building equity in a tangible asset. You are paying down your loan. The property itself may appreciate in value over time. You have created a new stable income stream for yourself. One that is directly tied to the success of the very company that thought it could dismiss you. You have turned their operational cost into your personal wealth. Audacious, it was almost laughable, but it stuck. It took root. So my final advice is this: when you face a professional setback, especially a demeaning one, don't get mad. Get strategic. Look for the underlying assets. Look for the permanent leverage. Litigation is a battle you fight on their terms. In their arena, acquisition is you buying the arena. It transforms a moment of profound professional weakness into the foundation of your lasting financial strength. It's not about getting even, it's about getting ahead permanently. The most dangerous part of being told you don't belong isn't the humiliation in the moment. It's the silence that comes after, when the office door closes and you're alone with the words. That's when the real work begins, the internal work. Because that statement, it's a seed. And if you're not careful, it takes root. You start watering it with your own doubts. You replay every mistake, every awkward silence in a meeting, every piece of feedback that wasn't glowing. You construct an entire case against yourself using their words as the primary evidence. Imposter syndrome stops being a quiet whisper in the back of your mind and becomes a deafening roar. It tells you they were right, that you got lucky, that you've been faking it all along, and they finally saw through you. The downward spiral is a real and physical thing. It feels like a drain opening up inside your chest, and everything, your confidence, your ambition, your sense of purpose, just start circling, getting pulled down into this dark, tight vortex. You go through the motions at work, but you're just a ghost. You're waiting for the next shoe to drop, for the final confirmation of your inadequacy. It's a paralyzing state. You stop taking risks, you stop contributing ideas, you make yourself small, hoping to become invisible, because visibility feels like an invitation for more pain. The turning point isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a flash of lightning. For me, it was a Tuesday morning. I was on my way to work, stuck in traffic. And I just felt this weight, this immense crushing weight of carrying around this idea that I was a fraud. And I realized I was tired, not just sleep-tired, but soul-tired, exhausted from the performance. And a question popped into my head, clear and sharp as broken glass. Who gave them the authority? Who gave that man the right to define my boundaries, to decide the limits of my potential? The answer was obvious: no one. I did. By believing him, I had handed him that authority, and in that moment, I decided to take it back. That was the shift, the reframing. I stopped looking at his words as a verdict on me, and started seeing them as a window into him, a person who uses their power to belittle, to exclude, to make others feel small. That's not a sign of strength, it's a confession of weakness. It's a reflection of their own insecurities, their own fears. His statement, "you don't belong," was never about my capabilities. It was about his need to feel superior to maintain a hierarchy. Where he was on top once, I saw that the words lost their power. They were no longer a life sentence. They were just the unfortunate opinion of a flawed man. The weight began to lift. But deciding to reject the label is just the first step. The real work is in the rebuilding. You have to forge a new identity from scratch, because the old one has been shattered. And that starts with discipline. The anger you feel is a potent fuel, but it's volatile. If you let it rage uncontrolled, it burns you up from the inside. It makes you bitter, reactive. The discipline was in channeling that fire. I'd feel the heat rise when I thought about what he said, but instead of letting it simmer into resentment, I gave my 2 weeks' notice. The next day I was perfectly polite, professional. I said I was pursuing another opportunity. David almost looked relieved. He gave me the standard speech about how I was a valued asset, and they were sorry to see me go. I think he believed he'd won, that he'd neatly excised a problem. I didn't correct him. I just smiled and thanked him for the opportunity. Convert it. I'd use that energy to work later, to research more deeply, to prepare for a meeting with an intensity I never had before. That anger became my focus. It was the energy source for my new foundation. I developed what I call a fortress mentality. The naysayers, the doubts, the sidelong glances from colleagues who'd heard the rumor, they were all just background noise, artillery fire against the walls of my fortress. I stopped letting them in. I built resilience by consciously choosing what I would internalize. Every negative comment was a brick I could use to build my walls higher, to make my resolve stronger. It wasn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. It was about strategic defense, protecting the fragile new growth inside of the belief in myself. A crucial part of that fortress was the visualization. This wasn't just daydreaming, it was a deliberate daily practice. I would close my eyes, and I would picture it not just owning the company, but the specific moment sitting in his office, in his chair, the feeling of the cool leather, the weight of the responsibility, the silence of the building after hours, when it was finally truly mine. I visualized signing the papers, the stroke of the pen. I made the outcome so real, so tangible in my mind, that it became an anchor. On the days when the fear was loud, when the plan seemed impossible, I would grab hold of that anchor. I'd go back to that feeling of quiet ownership. It pulled me back from the brink of doubt every single time. I couldn't have done it alone. A fortress needs a trusted few allowed inside the gates. For me, that was my spouse, and one old friend from college, someone completely disconnected from my professional world. They weren't there to strategize with me. They were there for encouragement, to listen when I needed, to voice the fear without judgment, to remind me of who I was outside of that toxic environment. Their belief in me was a steady, calm light. When my own inner light was flickering, they were the keepers of my morale. And their support was the difference between stubbornness and sustained conviction. Then comes the execution phase. This is where psychology meets action, walking into negotiations, talking to bankers, dealing with lawyers, all while the person I was ultimately buying from was still my boss, still utterly unaware. That required a level of emotional control that was almost theatrical. I had to project calm competence, while inside my heart was a triformer. The psychology was to enter every single discussion from a position of hidden strength. I knew the endgame. They didn't. That knowledge was my secret weapon. It allowed me to be patient, to listen more than I spoke, to not get rattled by minor setbacks, because I could see the whole board, even if my opponent thought I was just a pawn. Managing the fear of failure was a constant battle. The what if questions were relentless. What if the financing falls through? What if he finds out and fires me out of spite? What if I buy the company and run it into the ground, proving him right? After all, these weren't abstract thoughts. They were nightmares that woke me up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. I had to confront them head-on. I'd play out the worst-case scenario. Okay, if it all blows up, I lose my job. I have skills. I'll find another job. I'll start over. That night, I started my research. It began as a fantasy, a way to bleed off the anger. I looked into the company's financials. They were a private firm, but you can find a lot if you know where to look. Their growth had plateaued. Rumors of a cash flow problem started to make sense. Then I dug into the building itself. It was an older prestige address, not some modern glass box. I spent hours cross-referencing property records, business filings, and then I founded a tiny listing, not even on the major. It would be humiliating, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Acknowledging the worst and accepting that I could survive it stripped the fear of its power. It became a risk I had calculated, not a monster lurking in the dark. The biggest moment of doubt came the night before the purchase was finalized. I was sitting at my kitchen table. Surrounded by stacks of documents, the enormity of the commitment hit me like a physical blow. The debt, the responsibility for all those employees, the sheer audacity of what I was about to do. The voice came back, the old familiar one: "Who do you think you are? You don't belong here." And for a moment, I faltered. I felt like a fraud again. But then I went through the ritual, the reaffirmation of purpose. I asked myself, why are you doing this? It wasn't for revenge, not really revenge, was the spark. But the fire was about something else. It was about proving to myself that I could define my own belonging. It was about creating something better than what existed. It was about giving people a place to work where they would never be made to feel the way I had been. Remembering that why was like throwing a switch. The doubt receded, the purpose flooded back in solid, and sure, I picked up the pen. The transformation, when it finally happened, was quieter than I ever imagined. The reveal, the moment I sat across from him and explained the new ownership structure. Yes, there was a fleeting sense of schadenfreude, seeing the shock on his face, the confusion. But it was quickly washed away by something much deeper, a profound, bone-deep validation. It was the feeling of a circle closing, of a journey being completed. The external victory was just proof of the internal one that had already taken place. The experience rewired me. It fundamentally changed my self-perception. I was no longer an employee waiting for permission, seeking validation. From above, I was an owner. The buck stopped with me. And I was no longer a victim of someone else's cruelty. I was a victor. But the victory was over my own limitations, over my own willingness to accept a false narrative. The shift is permanent. You can't unsee your own strength once you've been forced to rely on it so completely. The lasting change is this understanding, this core truth that I carry with me every day. Belonging is not granted. It is not a membership card given to you by a boss, an institution, or a group. Belonging is self-defined. It is built, it is claimed through action and conviction. You belong wherever you decide to plant your feet and commit your energy. No one else gets a vote. So my advice for building an unshakable mindset for any challenge is this: first, do the internal audit. When you hear that negative voice, whether it's your own or someone else's, question its source. Separate the fact from the feeling. Reframe the attack as information about the attacker. Second, channel your emotions into fuel. Don't let anger or fear control you, harness them. Use that energy to build your focus, your plan, your fortress. Third, visualize the outcome with such specificity that it becomes a reality. Your mind before it exists in the world, that vision will be your compass. Fourth, find your small council, the people who believe in you unconditionally. Let their faith sustain you when your own wavers. And finally, always remember your why. The deeper purpose is the anchor that will hold you fast through the storm. The goal isn't just to win, it's to become the person capable of the win. The journey is the transformation. So there I was, standing in Gary's office. You know Gary, picture the human embodiment of a spreadsheet that's learned to wear a tie and developed a weird personal attachment to the office thermostat. He's sitting there leaning back in his big leather chair, steepling his fingers like a low-budget villain in a movie that goes straight to streaming. The whole scene was so cliché, I almost laughed. He had this ridiculous little Zen garden on his desk that he'd just aggressively rake while he was talking to you. Aggressive Zenning, that was his vibe. Commercial real estate sites, the holding company that owned our building, had quietly put it up for sale. The price was astronomical, impossible. But the seed was planted. The idea was no longer a fantasy, it was a target. He cleared his throat, a sound like a car engine that won't turn over. We're making some strategic repositioning moves, he said, which is corporate speak for you're about to get canned. I just nodded, my brain already writing the script internally. I was the sarcastic voiceover in my own sitcom. And here we see the middle manager in his natural habitat, I thought, delivering bad news, with the dramatic flair of a man, announcing a new brand of paper clips. The reason was magnificent. It wasn't performance, it wasn't budgets, it was Comic Sans. Id used Comic Sans in the footer of a draft proposal. For the quarterly budget meeting, a draft, not the final thing, a placeholder. Gary had spotted it during his weekly snoop through everyone's files session. He pointed a trembling finger at my monitor. This font, he whispered, his voice full of a fake grave disappointment. It lacks seriousness, it undermines the corporate ethos. My internal monologue was having a field day. The corporate ethos, everyone threatened by a whimsical letter alert the board. Outwardly, I just blinked. I couldn't even muster a defense. What was I going to say? I am sorry. The clip art of a smiling sun demanded a more playful typeface. The walk of shame out of his office was pure slapstick. I tried to play it cool, gave a little wave to Brenda at her desk, and promptly tripped over the trash. Kenny always kept right by the door. It went clattering, sending used coffee cups and crumpled up motivational memes. Everywhere I made direct, prolonged eye contact with the sad little fiddle-leaf fig tree in the corner. The one he always forgot to water. I gave it a silent, solemn nod. Hang in there, buddy, y'all be compost soon too. The first week of unemployment was a blur of self-pity and sugar. I established a new routine. It involved a tub of Rocky Road ice cream for breakfast and a deep scholarly analysis of daytime television. I learned more about paternity tests and surprise home makeovers than anyone human should ever know. My excitement for the day was deciding whether to wear my sweatpants with the hole in the left knee or the right. It was during one of these thrilling afternoons, while scrolling through outrageously expensive condos, I could never afford a sort of digital window shopping for a life. I'd never have it that I saw it. It popped up between a charming fixer-upper that was just a shed and a luxury loft that was clearly a converted parking garage. The listing was for a commercial property, 1247 Oak Avenue, my old office building. I snorted, spraying a little diet soda on my laptop. The photo was the exact same stock image they used on the company website. Gary must have been really cutting costs. I clicked on it, just for a laugh. The price made my eyes water. It was a lot. But then I remembered the severance package. It wasn't huge, but it was something, and I had other resources, a bittersweet inheritance from my late aunt, that I'd been too nervous to touch, just sitting in a savings account, gathering a pathetic amount of interest. That's when I had the hold my coffee moment. It wasn't even a fully formed thought. It was more of a primal, ridiculous impulse, a spark of beautiful, insane inspiration. I wasn't holding a coffee. I was holding a spoonful of melting ice cream. But the sentiment was the same. I set the bowl down. I thought, what if I just called the realtor? What's the worst that could happen? The first hurdle was sounding professional. The realtor's name was Alina, and she had a voice that could cut glass. I called her while wearing my lucky pizza-stained pajama bottoms. Hello, Alina, I said, trying to lower my voice an octave. This is John Smith from Vengeance Properties LLC. I just plucked the name out of the air. It felt right. I'm calling about the listing on Oak Avenue. There was a long pause. I was convinced she could smell the desperation and frozen dairy through the phone. But she just said, excellent. When would you like to schedule a viewing? The next 2 years were intense. I took a higher-paying, more demanding job at a competitor. I lived on half my salary. Every bonus, every spare dollar went into a separate account. I met with financial advisors, laid out a brutal 5-year plan, and then compressed it into 2. I learned everything I could about commercial real estate acquisition. I became an expert in leveraged buyouts, financing structures. It was like getting a second MBA, but with a very specific, very personal goal: I'd drive. The next 2 weeks felt like I was a secret agent in a very boring, paperwork-heavy spy thriller. My mission: acquire the target using a fake identity. And a lot of nerve. I bought a cheap, overly formal suit that made me look like a teenager going to his first prom. I showed up for the building inspection feeling like a complete fraud. And of course, who else would be there supervising the process? But Gary. He was fussing over the inspector, saying things like, now y'all note the premium grade carpeting in the executive wing. He saw me and did a classic double take. He spluttered, what are you doing here? Come to beg for your job back? Sorry, the font amnesty program has expired. My heart was pounding. I could feel the sweat forming on my brow. This was admission failure. But a leaner, glorious, sharp-edged Alina stepped in. Mr. Smith is the potential buyer, she said, her tone implying that Gary was something she'd just scraped off her shoe. Gary's face went through an entire rainbow of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a smug dismissal. Oh, I see, a property scout. Well, it's a prime location. A bit out of your league, I'd imagine. Smith, he patted me on the shoulder, a condescending little tap. I just smiled weakly. The fear of discovery was a constant humming anxiety. I almost gave the game away when I instinctively reached for my old keycard to get into the supply closet. The day of the signing was surreal. I met with Alina and the lawyers in a room that smelled of old paper and anxiety. I signed about 1,000 documents. My hand was shaking, but I scrawled John Smith with a flourish. When it was finally done, Alina handed me the keys. They felt unnaturally heavy. I went home to my apartment with the leaky faucet and sat on my couch. I'd bought a building, a whole entire building. I cracked open a bottle of the cheapest champagne I could find. It tasted like fizzy apple juice and raised. A solo toast to my own audacity. The moment had arrived. The punchline: how do you deliver news like that? A formal letter felt too dry. A phone call felt too intimate. I decided on an email. But I crafted it with the care of a poet. The subject line was update regarding your lease agreement at 1247 Oak Avenue. I wrote, Dear Gary, hope this email finds you well. Just a quick note to inform you that the ownership of the property located at 1247 Oak Avenue has recently been transferred. All future communications regarding your lease, including rent payments and maintenance requests, should be directed to me. I've taken the liberty of reviewing the current terms, and I am sure we'll have a very productive landlord-tenant relationship. Best regards, your new landlord. You might know me better as the... With the unserious font. I clicked send, and then I waited. It took maybe 3 minutes. My phone rang. It was Gary. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. Then, the emails started. They were masterpieces of incoherent rage sentences. Like, this is a fraudulent misrepresentation of corporate property acquisition protocols, and I will be contacting legal entities. My favorite was, what is the meaning of this jest?